So this is Nate. You can also call me Nathan, but please never call me Nathaniel. And welcome to reviewing every Monster Train card featuring Umbra. This is the fourth video in the series. And as with all the others, we'll be going through every single one of the cards, talking about their level of power in terms of like what's the maximum level of power you can get out of it, what's the consistency. I have modified a little bit due to the feedback I've gotten and also just kind of going through. So I'll show you that in just a minute. I've added another layer, especially to the B's and C's, where it was sometimes difficult to distinguish between the B's and C's, which one was better or worse. So let's start with the setup. So again, we are going to be reviewing every single card in every clan. All champions and artifacts will be covered as part of separate videos, so they won't be covered here. We'll do a champions video and artifacts video in the future. We will review the cards in context of standard single-player play, so we're not talking about multiplayer, daily challenges, any type of mutators, just standard play. And the cards are not reviewed in a vacuum, but rather we review the cards, or I'm reviewing the cards in context of the major builds that we use, or that I use typically, and how well they fit into those different build archetypes. Rating scale. S is still the same as it was before. S represents a card that is powerful in all situations. There are only 2 S cards, I believe, currently in the game. One of them we already covered, which is Unleash the Wildwood. Unleash the Wildwood. Some people, I actually saw this on Discord. People are trashing Unleash the Wildwood. The reason why Unleash the Wildwood I think is an S card is if you can get it holdover, it's basically a guaranteed your units survive for the entire rest of the game. It doesn't do much for Relentless, but to be honest, if you're relying on a single card for Relentless, you've already lost. So people are like, yeah, it's just really bad against Relentless. It's like, well, but it's a card that gets you to Relentless guaranteed every single time. So I still think it's an S card. Some people may disagree. There will be one more we'll cover today. Situationally powerful cards that are otherwise strong are A's. So this means it's a card that can become really powerful, but the worst case is it's still an incredibly strong card. And they're also very rare. Not as rare as S cards, but they're still quite rare. There are a few in Umbra as well we'll cover today. B's are generally strong cards. That would be a flat B. Or it's a situationally powerful card that is otherwise very average. So the worst case would be an average effect, but it has the chance for getting a very powerful effect if you upgrade it or you modify the card, or you have a build that kind of takes advantage of the card. A plus indicates that it's quite easy. So it's an average card that's quite easy to make very powerful. Minus would be an average card that is very difficult to make very powerful, but is still possible to make very powerful. C is a generally average card, so that would be a flat C is a generally average card, or it's a situationally powerful card that is otherwise weak. So the baseline is a weak card, basically the equivalent of a deadweight, and then it has the possibility of becoming very powerful. And again, plus or minus represents how likely or how easy is it to get that powerful effect. Plus being quite easy, minus being very difficult. And then D's are very rare. They're even more rare than A's, but they're less rare than S's. And they are cards that are just across the board very weak. They're equivalent to a deadweight no matter what you do. And there's only a handful of them, I think, right now in the game that need to really be buffed to be worthwhile. So then, moving into the builds. Starting with Umbra builds, we're only going to cover Umbra builds. Starting with Penumbra. We have the Monstrous Emberdrain package. It's very straightforward. You take Monstrous Penumbra, you take the Emberdrain package, and the Monstrous Penumbra takes advantage of the lifesteal, takes advantage of the multi-strike, takes advantage of the rage to do insane damage and clears all the floors by himself. Next is All Aboard the Train. This is the Architect build. Typically you have a gorging tank in the front, so something like Shadow Eater, Crucible Ward, and Crucible Collector. You have Architect, and then you're just adding a bunch of morsels. Architect does a huge amount of burst damage and can take advantage of things like if you get trample or multi-strike. And then the Gorge unit is getting really, really big and also getting either a lot of health, lifesteal, or damage shield. and then tanks for the Architect, who is your main damage dealer. You have Gorge the Penumbra. So this is Glutton build. You do Glutton on the top or middle floor, and then you have a second floor below that is an AoE or burst floor. Either way, so either you use Gorge the Penumbra to do AoE by having him plus like a Morsel Maker, Morsel Master, and they can take out 2 units by themselves, or you have an AoE floor below and Gorge the Penumbra is killing the big burst unit in the front with his Glutton. So he's getting a lot of gorging, getting really strong, and then killing either way. Primordium builds. Basically, there's 2 styles. One is the Country Kitchen. This is the superfood build, where the reason it's called Country Kitchen is it's like the idea of a Country Kitchen is that you have all these extras. It's not just like the basic food. It's like a buffet with extra, right? And the extra is the Spikes, Rage, and Multi-Strike that you get from superfood. I guess you can also put Damage Shield in there, but that's a very minor one. It's mostly for Spikes, Rage, and Multi-Strike. Sometimes also Lifesteal. And then the ultimate buffet is Stalwart Snack, where you have a tanky or a scaling Gorge unit in front, taking advantage of all of the buffets. Okay. Outside of the champion focused builds, you have a couple other ones. We are going now to the most straightforward and simplest of the builds. This is the Just Play Shadow Siege 4-head build. It's exactly like it says. You just play Shadow Siege. That's it. The easiest way to pull this off is with a Sketches of Salvation. So you get Sketches of Salvation, you get multiple Shadow Sieges. You get one Shadow Siege and you duplicate it a bunch, and then they get played automatically at the beginning of the round, and they just win it for you. Even better is if you can get Multi-Strike and Quick. The alternative is that you just find a way to play Shadow Siege from your hand. So you get extra Ember, you get extra capacity, you make sure to leave space, and then you just play Shadow Siege directly from your hand. Usually you only play 1 Shadow Siege, maybe 2 if you have overstacking, or if you have 2 open floors. But generally it's just 1. It has Multi-Strike, it has Quick, and can solo every boss except for Seraph. And then for Seraph, usually you either buff the Shadow Siege, get like Lifesteal or Damage Shield, or you have a second floor that can handle the relentless combat. Next is the Get Behind Me build. So here you do a Gorge floor. You have a Gorger typically on the middle or bottom floor, and you need one that's quite tanky. So Shadow Eater, Crucible Warden, Crucible Collector. You could also use Overgorger depending on how you set it up, but it's not usually best to do Overgorger. And then you have a floor above with a bunch of damage dealers. You have Monstrous Penumbra, you have Architect Penumbra, you have Shadow Siege, whatever. You put a bunch of stuff above it. Probably not Shadow Siege, that's its own thing. But it's a bunch of units above, and then you get Permafrost Cave-In. And when the boss gets to that floor, for relentless combat, you cave in the top onto the behind the Gorger. The Gorger tanks all the hits, and then all of your backline is doing a lot of damage. Support for other classes. Biggest one is that this provides the emberdrain package to any other class. So now you can get all of that really good emberdrain cards and put them into a Hellhorn, Stygian Guard, Awoken, or Melting Remnant deck, which is always good. They give you morsels to chump block with or to buff, and use them either way. Both are good, whether you're chump blocking or buffing. And then you get Damage Shield, Lifesteal, and Ember Generation. These are the main kind of like support that you're getting out of the clan. Classes, clans. I need to change that. I've done that wrong in every single other video. It needs to be clans, not classes. Let's jump into the units now, starting with the common units. Oh wait, there are no common units. Let's jump right into uncommon. I'm not going to cover morsels because they're not standalone cards. Basically, you can consider a morsel as a like a half ember unit with varying benefits. But we won't cover them. We'll cover just the cards that you actually are playing from your hand. Starting with uncommon. First is Crucible Collector. Crucible Collector has text. Gorge, gain 1 lifesteal. It's a 1 cost 20/20 unit. So even at the worst would be that you play Crucible Collector and you never gorge with it. Even a 1 cost 20/20 is an average unit. So this is never going to be bad. It's better statted than a lot of other one-cost units in other clans. So even if you don't gorge, it's still going to be good. If you just get a handful of gorges, it's already very strong. Especially for the first 5 or 6 rings, because most bosses cannot do more than 20 damage in a single hit, meaning that every single tick of lifesteal means an entire extra turn of combat for that floor. So Crucible Collector at worst is average. It's very easy to make him strong. He just needs a few gorges to become strong, and if you can gorge enough, then he becomes incredibly powerful, especially if you get something like Large Stone on him. To be able to get through the final few rings, he does need to have at least 30, probably 35 health and 35 damage. That means that he will out-heal Seraph's attack, and that's what you need. He needs to be able to out-heal Seraph. The exception would be Seraph the Patient, and Crucible Collector is pretty bad against Seraph the Patient. He's also pretty bad against Seraph the Chased because his lifesteal is going to get halved every turn. But Seraph the Patient is the biggest issue because that melee weakness will get Crucible Collector almost every time. So you got to be a little bit careful with the Seraphs, but in general, it's an average unit that can become very strong very easily, which fits right nicely into a grade of B+. Next up is Crucible Warden. Crucible Warden has text Gorge, Gain Damage Shield 1. It's a 1-cost 20/20, same as the Crucible Collector. Crucible Warden is a little bit different. Crucible Warden is a little bit better with more damage and with multi-strike. You don't really want to multi-strike on the Crucible Collector because then it gets rid of your lifesteal twice as quickly. But Crucible Warden, you don't care about that because damage shield isn't affected by how much you do damage. It's also significantly better with Quick. You don't also want to put Quick onto Crucible Collector because then it gets rid of its lifesteal before it gets damaged. But Crucible Warden, Quick is really good because you can end up killing units before they damage you and take off your damage shield. So Quick and Multi-Strike are premier upgrades. Large Stone's also very good in general. You don't typically need a lot of health upgrades because of the damage shield. And then Crucible Warden has the same problem with Seraph the Chased like Crucible Collector. The damage shield will get halved every time the Seraph goes and cleanses the floor. However, it's significantly better against Seraph the Patient because Seraph the Patient doesn't multi-strike. So against Seraph the Patient, Crucible Warden is like really, really excellent because the melee weakness doesn't make you take any additional damage shield damage. So as long as you have consistent morsels to gorge with, Crucible Warden ends up being a fantastic tank against that particular Seraph. It's worse against all the others because they multi-strike, which means that you're going to lose damage shield 3 times faster. So Crucible Warden is typically better. Well, they're both about equal early game. Crucible Warden gets a lot better mid game than Crucible Collector, but the Crucible Collector typically is better late game, with the exception being Seraph the Patient, where Crucible Warden is much better. But they still kind of fit the same space. They're average units that can become incredibly strong very easily. Next up is Emberforge. Emberforge has text, add 2 Ember per turn. This is while it is alive. If it dies early, you don't get the Ember. I learned this by mistake, but I learned it, and so should you. So as long as it's alive, you get the Ember. It doesn't matter if it's dazed or anything like that. You still get the Ember because it's a text. It's not an active or a resolve trigger. It also has stats 0 damage, 20 health for 1. That's a really, really pitiful stat. So then you really only take Emberforge if you need the Ember. And so what are the ways you are going to take advantage of the Ember? One is going to be to play Shadow Siege. So you use it as a way to enable Shadow Siege decks, but the +2 Ember by itself is not going to be enough. You're going to need a 3rd Ember somewhere, either from a relic or from another source of Ember. Otherwise, you're using it for X-cost cards or for just if you have a really expensive deck in general. The problem with Emberforge, I find, is it's very difficult to keep it alive because it has such low health. It can't really tank. You don't want it in the back line because it doesn't do damage either. So tanking for an Emberforge is kind of silly. And then there's not that many decks that need the +2 Ember to function. X cost cards are typically better if you have other ways of generating Ember, or if you have the first Hell Pact. And it's not the best enabler for Shadow Siege either. You would need either 2 Ember Forges or another source on top of the Ember Forge. So for me, as a baseline, it's a very weak unit. If you can't take advantage of the Ember, it's basically a deadweight because it doesn't do any damage and it can't really block very well. And at best, it's enabling something else to be very strong, and it's very difficult, in my opinion, to set that up properly. So I think it fits as a C-. It's a weak card that can become very strong, but it's very, very difficult to get all the things together to take advantage of the extra Ember, in my opinion. So, moving forward, Morsel Master. Morsel Master has text. When you summon a Morsel unit on this floor, create a copy of it. It's a 1-cost 10/10, which is pretty bad stats, but the effect is really strong. The nice thing about the effect is that it does not care about Morsel Master's status. So if Morsel Master is stunned, it doesn't matter. You can still get the effect of the text. The other nice thing about Morsel Master is it's very small, and it allows you to overstack floors with morsels. So if you have, for example, a Shadow Eater, then you play Morsel Master, getting you up to 4 capacity, and then you play a Morsel, it's going to overstack that extra morsel onto the floor. It's also good because you can place the morsels wherever you want. So sometimes you want to put the morsels in between your units so that you can gorge with them. Sometimes you want to put the morsels in the back so that they can do extra damage. So for example, if you have like a high damage and then like a 1 health, and you get a Morsel Excavator, for example, you can put the Morsel Excavator behind the Morsel Master, and you get 2 of them, and they can kill off 1 health units in the back. So that flexibility of being able to place your units wherever you want is very, very useful. You can even use it to chump block. So if you have, for example, the Relic, which adds damage shield onto the first unit played, or damage shield onto morsels, you can then place your morsel in the front. It will get the damage shield and it will get copied, and that can be an effective tank for that floor. So that versatility, I think, is really, really valuable. With that, at worst, it's I would say an average unit, because as long as you're getting a 1 duplicated morsel out of it, it's still really valuable. Even if it's just gorging itself, there's a lot of things you can do with it without even having like a gorge-oriented deck to still take advantage of Morsel Master. But typically you're only going to take it when you have a gorge minion, and there it becomes very powerful. One thing to note is that Morsel Master, if you have multiple of them, they don't copy the copies. So if you play a morsel on a floor with 2 Morsel Masters, you will get 3 morsels, you won't get 4 morsels, because it won't copy copies. It only copies the original one played. So it's 1 additional copy per morsel played. Yeah, so with that, I think that it fits really nicely as a solid B unit. It's just a generally strong unit. I actually may consider changing this. So this might be a B+, because I think it can be really powerful, and it can be very average. So we'll come back to this. For now, we'll leave it at B, but this might actually end up being a B+ when we do the final overview of all the cards. Next up is Alloyed Construct. Alloyed Construct has text inert. Inert means that it starts with 0 fuel. It has multi-strike 1, and it has gorge gain fuel 1. It's a 2-cost 25/25, 25 by 2 with a multi-strike. And the way, you probably know, but the way that Alloyed Construct works is that every turn it uses 1 fuel as long as it has fuel. And as long as it has fuel, it will attack. If it doesn't have fuel, it will not attack. So a couple things with Alloyed Construct. It certainly can be very powerful. You get a large stone on it, you get quick on it, and as long as it's fueled, it's pretty good. Couple problems. One, it's a 2-cost. And the 2-cost makes it very difficult and clunky to play, and then immediately take benefits by playing either other units or playing other spells, including generating morsels. This becomes problematic. It especially becomes problematic because one of the best things to put with an Alloyed Construct is a Morsel Master, and they both cost 2. So you can't play them both at the same time unless you have a way to generate Ember or you've taken an Ember Relic. So that's a problem. The second problem with Alloyed Construct is the fuel mechanic. You lose fuel whether you attack or not. It is not per strike, it is per turn or per round of combat. But the problem is during relentless combat, you lose 1 fuel every single round, every single time that every single round, which means that it's very easy to have Alloyed Construct with very little fuel during relentless and then just die to the boss because it can't attack anymore. The third problem is that the health total doesn't really allow Alloyed Construct to tank without significant either buffs or stat increases. So you need things like Morsel Miner, or you need things like excavators, or I can't remember what they're called, the damage shield morsels, in order for him to survive relentless combat, even if he has enough fuel. Given all of those, I think it's a weak unit as a base, but becomes quite strong if you have significant morsel generating capability. So as long as you can consistently generate good morsels, Alloyed Construct is good. If you can't, then Alloyed Construct is quite poor. So given that, I think it is a C+. I think it's quite easy to get consistent morsel generation with an Umbra deck, but know that if you don't have it, this is going to be a really, really bad unit for you. Next up is Morsel Maker. Morsel Maker has text Resolve, summon an Antumbra Morsel and a Magma Morsel. So Magma Morsels are 4 damage, 1 health morsels that on eaten gain 4 damage. Antumbra Morsel is a 1 damage, 5 health minion, or 5 health morsel that has text eaten gain 4 health. So a couple things about Morsel Maker. It is affected by daze. So if your Morsel Maker is dazed, it will not create any morsels. It will always create the morsels directly in front of it. So it will always create them. If it's behind a unit, it will create it between the Morsel Maker and the unit that's in front of it. If it's in the very front, it will create the morsels in the very front, and so forth. It can overstack. So if you have a full capacity floor, and then you play Morsel Maker as the final capacity, it will create the 2 as overstacked minions. A couple of problems with Morsel Maker. One, it's a 2 cost. And the fact that it's a 2 cost makes it very clunky to play, and then also play other things, as we just discussed with the Alloyed Construct. The second big problem with Morsel Maker is it doesn't have any flexibility. You have no flexibility over what morsels it creates, and you have no flexibility over where they get placed. And this becomes very problematic. If, for example, you need to chump block, you can't. Morsel Maker does not give you the flexibility to put morsels in front. And if you want to get better morsels, you also can't, because you get automatically the Antumbra and Magma morsels. The third major issue with Morsel Maker is that if you get Morsel Maker before your Gorge minion comes out, there's the possibility that your Gorge minion can't fit on the floor. Your Morsel Maker would create 2 additional units up front. That would take up 3 capacity. If you have then, for example, a Shadow Eater, it can't fit anymore. Or if you have a Large Stone, any other Gorger, it can't fit anymore. And that can become a real problem. That you have your Morsel Maker, and then all of a sudden your Morsel Maker is just, feeding himself. He's not feeding your unit. So that's something to be cautious of. The fact that you can play to the top floor and not immediately take benefits is a problem, and the 2 cost is a problem. Given all those problems, I think it's a baseline weak unit, but certainly in specific types of combinations can be very strong. There's always the nuts Morsel Maker, Morsel Master combo that's going to generate 4 morsels per turn. That's pretty good. It's difficult to pull off, but if you do it, it's quite good. And getting a Morsel Maker with something like a Shadow Eater or an Overgorger can be very, very strong as well. Overgorger because then it's consistently gorging, getting that permanent permanent damage upgrade. And then with Shadow Eater, it's a permanent healing and AoE. So given that, I think it's a C+. It's a weak unit that has the possibility of becoming very strong with the right setup. Certainly it's worse than Morsel Master if you talk about consistency. Next up is our rare units, starting with Shadow Eater. Shadow Eater has text Gorge, restore 10 health, deal 10 damage to enemy units. This is an AoE damage to all enemy units. I think Shadow Eater is a little bit looked over by a lot of players. I think it's a much better unit than it seems at first. The 10 AoE is pretty consistent. As long as you have at least one morsel per turn, that's going to kill every backliner in the game that's unarmored, which is really good. So it's a very easy way to get consistent AoE. It's fantastic with a morsel maker, because then you're getting 20 AoE and 20 healing every turn. And it's a decent tank. It has 50 health, and very likely is going to gain more health from the units that it's gorging. The issue with Shadow Eater is that it's a 2-cost unit, and it takes up 3 space, which makes it very clunky to play out. So you can't play it out with a Morsel Maker in the same turn unless you have Ember Generation. It also has 0 damage. So it's a little bit awkward to think about what you want to put on it in terms of stones. Large stone makes it difficult to play any morsels on that floor. Health stone's typically what I go for to just make it more tanky. But then you really need a damaging unit behind. A very interesting thing you can do is you can get Morsel Master with extra damage and multi-strike and put it behind a Shadow Eater. And that actually turns out to be pretty good, because the extra 20 damage you would get, or extra 40 damage you would get from the Morsel Master, ends up being pretty valuable, and then you have a really strong tank up front. This is the best unit to do the Get Behind Me build, I think. Maybe a Warden might be as good, but you can get Shadow Eater, you can gorge a whole bunch, get it really healthy, and then you can drop units behind it to do extra damage during relentless combat. The problem with Shadow Eater is it's really difficult to make it very powerful because of how big it is, and because you don't really want multi-strike on it unless you can guarantee you're going to consistently get damage bonuses on it. So with that, I think it's at worst an average unit, and I think it has the possibility to become powerful, but it's very difficult to make it powerful. But by itself, I think it's a very average unit. It's very rare that you're going to not get a lot of effect out of it. Even just using it as an AoE clearer is quite good. Okay. Next up is Overgorger. Overgorger has text Gorge +2 damage permanently. It's a 0 damage, 15 health unit that is a 2-cost. Overgorger is one of the best carries in the game. What's important is to know how to play Overgorger. So the way you play Overgorger is from rings 1 to 7. Overgorger needs to be in the front, in the top, and gorging as much as possible. And you do everything you can to get as many gorges as possible. Once you get to Seraph, he is no longer gorging. You put him in the back, you get a tank in front, and you let him do his damage. This is one of the things that a lot of people make mistakes with, is Overgorger is not a tank. He works quite badly as a tank. You want him as a damage dealer. You scale him throughout most of the game, and then at the end, during the final ring, you put him in the back and let him do his damage. Best upgrades are quick and multi-strike. He's not very good with large stone because of he's already a 3 capacity unit. He is okay with health stones to make him a little bit tankier, but again, you really don't want him to be your tank. You want him to be your damage dealer. What's also quite smart to do is to duplicate him on the final floor. So you gorge, you give him multi-strike, and then you duplicate him so you have 2 of them to work and to try to kill Seraph with. This ends up being quite good. He pairs well with Morsel Maker, pairs well with Morsel Master, and then of course any type of gorging you want to do. I think it's very difficult to get an average effect. I think he is always good. He's always good. Given that he is always good, he is a grade A unit. He's an always strong unit that is going to be incredibly powerful. Sure, the first couple of rounds you play him, he's not amazing, but normally you don't play him for the first few rings, you play him for the end game, and there he's insanely strong. And you're only going to get him, the last point you can get Overgorger is ring 4, and that's still enough time. You can still get a lot of gorges between ring 4 and ring 7. So, let's move on. Next up is Shadow Siege. Shadow Siege has no text. It is a 200 damage, 150 health unit for 6 Ember that takes up 6 capacity. I believe that before the nerf, and the nerf was that it increases capacity from 5 to 6. Before the nerf, I think that he was a B+ unit. So it was a unit that was fairly easy to play out, and because of the capacity, it was 5 capacity, it was much easier to work around than 6 capacity. And there's a lot of options in Umbra to gain Ember. And we'll talk about that when we get into the spells, but there's a lot of different ways to gain Ember to get the Shadow Siege out. That's not including all the artifacts which you can use. So you can get a Sketch to Salvation, you can get Ember-related artifacts. And there's a lot of different ways to get Shadow Siege played. And Shadow Siege played is not an auto win. It's an auto win for any ring except for Seraph. So Shadow Siege is able to kill every single boss by himself except Seraph. And then with Seraph, you need support. You either need more units, or you need consistent damage shield, lifesteal, or something else, furnace taps or something to improve Shadow Siege. Best upgrades here are Quick and Multi-Strike. Quick allows him to preserve his health. Multi-Strike allows him to kill more units. There is not a unit that has more than 200 health apart from bosses, so this will kill any frontliner in the game. It's all about playing it. And if you can't play him, it's a dead weight. So that's the weak, is that you have to consider that he can be unplayable, which means it's just a dead weight in your hand. So that means that best now he can be a C, and he can be a dead weight if you have no way to get extra capacity. Even if you have Ember generation, you might not be able to play him until after Ring 3, when you get a chance to upgrade and take a relic that increases capacity. And that is a problem. It's not an awful problem. It means after Ring 3, you're pretty likely able to play Shadow Siege. At least by then you know whether you can play Shadow Siege, because either you've gotten Ember generation or you haven't, and either you took the extra capacity or you didn't. Given that, I think he fits as a C+ unit. It's a weird one. If you can play Shadow Siege, it's amazing. If you can't play it, it's a dead weight. And that's how you have to look at it. And then how likely is it that you can play Shadow Siege? I think it is less likely now than it was in the past, but it's still quite likely that you can find a way to play Shadow Siege if you draft it early and then just make sure you orient your deck around being able to play him. Umbra spells, starting with common spells. Shade Splitter. Shade Splitter has text: add a common or uncommon morsel unit to your hand. It's a 1 cost. It's the standard morsel generator. It's I would say the morsels are an average effect. Depending on the setup. If you have a morsel master, then it's a little bit better. Or if you have ways to duplicate morsels, it's a little bit better. The problem with Shade Splitter is it can draw the common morsels, and the common morsels are pretty bad. That's Umbra, Magma, and what is he called? The Ember morsel. Those are the 3 common ones, and they're not particularly great. So given that you can get those 3, you sometimes get a little sad with what Shade Splitter gives you. So I would say on average, you're getting an average effect. And it's difficult to make it very powerful. Even at 0 cost, it's still not super powerful. But I think it's a pretty consistent average card. Given that, I think it fits really nicely as a grade of C. It's not the worst starter card. It's not the best starter card. It's a very average starter card. And it fits really well into the Umbra clan as a starter card. Next we have Plink. Plink has text: deal 1 damage to random enemy unit twice, and on slay add a common or uncommon morsel unit to your hand. The problem with Plink is the later the game gets, the harder it is to get the Plinks to actually kill anything. Early game, it's pretty easy because a lot of units have 2 health or 1 health. So if you get like the combats where you get like the 4 or 3 rage minions that have 1 health, it's pretty easy to get a couple morsels out of that, and then it's okay to carry you through the beginning. Dataless fights tend to go pretty well with Plink because you have the bombs that have 1 health, and you can typically get, I don't know, on average you'll Plink 2 or 3 of them, which is pretty good. Again, the problem with Plink is it doesn't scale at all, and when it's not working, it's garbage. 2 random damage is awful. It's worse than Frozen Lance. The only thing that makes it worthwhile is the Slay triggers. Getting plus 10 damage on it does make it a little bit better. I typically actually go plus 20 and consume. That for me seems to be the best way to set up Plink. You get plus 20, it will consume when you use it. You're typically going to get Slay triggers, giving you 2 morsels, and then it's a pretty good card, but only if you get specifically that upgrade. or if you have other magic damage or magic power upgrades, either cards or units or artifacts that increase your magic power, then it's also okay. But given that, I think it's a C- card. It's a weak card that can potentially become strong, but it's very difficult to make it strong. You really need specifically plus 20 and consume. And then the question is that worth putting on this over something else that might be better? Or you need magic power innate with units or cards or artifacts. Moving on, Mind Collapse. Mind Collapse has text, deal 3x damage to an enemy unit. On Slay, gain 2 Ember. Mind Collapse at worst is a good way to pick off backliners and then gain Ember from it. So if you have 1 Ember and you're killing off a backliner, you just killed an enemy and gained 1 Ember. If you have to use 2, because it's like a 5 health, then you killed off a unit for 0 Ember, which is also pretty good. Playing it for more than 2 Ember is starting to become a little bit sad. But even then, I'd say it's an average card at like base. It's an average card. And that, the 5 healths are even on Seraphites. Even if you don't have it upgraded on Seraphites, you can use 2 Ember, kill off a backliner, get 2 Ember back, which is always going to be good. Where Mind Collapse becomes amazing is once you get plus 10 damage on it, because then you can play it for 0, kill any backliner in the game, and gain 2 Ember from 0 Ember. So it's an Ember generator as long as you have magic power on it. I typically don't do the plus 20. I typically do plus 10 and holdover. Then you have an automatic 2 generating Ember every turn. This is especially good with emberdrain builds because you can start at 0 Ember and still then gain Ember to play other cards. It's not the best Ember generator, but it's pretty close to the best one. The downside with Mind Collapse is you can't play it on your own units, and it's not going to ever do a lot of damage. Even if you get a lot of magic power on it, it's basically 0 cost up to like 20 damage unit or 20 damage. And it's not a very good use of the X apart from the early, before it's been upgraded, 1 or 2 cost X. Like you don't want to put like 10, the 10X, that's 30 damage. It's not really that great. Given that, I think it's a B+ card. It's an average card that can become strong once you get a plus 10 modifier on it, and that's pretty easy to do. Any spell upgrade location, then you just add 10. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good card. Immortal Trade. Immortal Trade is the first of the Emberdrain package cards. It has text, apply Lifesteal 3 and Emberdrain 2 to a friendly unit. It's a 0 cost. So Immortal Trade, I think, is the worst of the Emberdrain package, which isn't really that bad. The Emberdrain package, by and large, is pretty good. The nice thing about the Immortal Trade is it's really good right before Relentless Combat. So what you can do is you can not play it, just let it be a dead weight, and then wait for it to show up either during the rest period or during the Relentless Combat. And that's going to give you basically 3 extra turns on your tank, as long as your tank is doing some kind of damage, which is really, really good. I mean, you put that on like Monstrous Penumbra, that's 3 extra hits with Monstrous Penumbra, which is a lot of damage. So even at without the Emberdrain package altogether, I think it's still a very average card. But then I think it has the potential to become really good once you get the Emberdrain package together and you have ways of generating Ember and not having to worry about Emberdrain anymore. So with that, I think it fits really nicely as a B-. It's an average card with an average effect that can become very strong if it's with the Emberdrain package where you are generating Ember consistently. Because then you can play it every time and stack up the lifesteal, and then it's really good. Okay, then we have Packed Morsels. So Packed Morsels is a 0 cost with text, consume, add 3 uncommon or rare morsels into your hand. I think this is really good. I think it's the best morsel generator. The fact that it consumes is actually pretty good because you want morsels earlier more than you want them later. It's a really good card to even remove consume from in certain decks. If this is like one of your only major morsel generators, then removing consume, minusing 1 makes it really good. You're going to consistently get it as a 0 cost morsel generator. Generating 3 morsels is excellent. That's typically enough to fill up any floor where you have a gorger, which is exactly what you want. Yeah, and they're all better morsels. They're higher quality morsels. Your morsel miners, morsel excavators, the one that gives you damage shield that I can't remember the name of. Those are the typical morsels you're going to get from it, which are all very, very good. Yeah, so then even if you don't have a gorge setup, it ends up being pretty good because you can use the morsels as chump blockers, or you can just enhance a non-gorge unit. So worst case is it's strong. Best case is it's really powerful. Given that, I think it fits really nicely as an A card. I don't think it's bad to take. It's one that I often will do ×5 on as well. Sometimes you get too many morsels, and then you have that first world problem of, oh, I've got too many morsels. But I think that's a very rare problem, and it's really not a problem. It means you're generating enough to satisfy all your floors, which is also really good. So let's move on. Perils of Production. Perils of Production has text, apply 2 Rage and Emberdrain 2 to a friendly unit, gain 3 Ember. It's a 0-cost card. I think Perils of Production is the best Ember generator in terms of consistency. You get holdover on Perils of Production. That is a guaranteed 3 Ember no matter how much Emberdrain you have. You can also get Permafrost on it, and then you can Permafrost it as a way of getting 6 Ember on a single turn, which is one of the ways that you get Shadow Siege out. So you get either Permafrost or holdover, and then preferably Permafrost. Shadow Siege passes, and then as you go through the deck, you'll get your Permafrosted Perils of Production. You wait for Shadow Siege to show back up, and then you play it and play your Shadow Siege. One thing to note with Perils of Production, and it's true of all Emberdrain, is if the unit dies or gets gorged or whatever, then you don't take the Emberdrain, because Emberdrain is affected at the beginning of the turn, not the end of the turn. So if you can get rid of the unit before the beginning of the next turn, you don't take the Emberdrain, which means that Perils of Production is often really good to use if you don't have a way to consistently get rid of or consistently get Ember. You have like Perils of Production without any additional card buffs on it, then you can just play it outright on a morsel. The morsel gets gorged, and you don't have to worry about the Emberdrain. That's typically how I play it when I don't have any consistent way to keep it in the hand. It's not really great for Rage. Like, Rage 2 is not really that much damage. It's 4 damage. Even if you have like a Deranged Brute, it's only like 12 damage. So it's really not, or not even 12 damage. 6, let's see, adds +3. So it'd be 8 damage. It's really not that much Rage damage. And it's hard to stack because it's so low. You don't want to put double stack on this at all. That makes it really bad because then it double stacks also the Emberdrain. So it's really Permafrost, holdover, and then you're quite good. And then it becomes a permanent Ember generator for the rest of the game. So with that, I think it's an average card to start, but it can be really, really strong if you can get holdover or Permafrost on it with the right decks. And oftentimes you will be able to make use of it if you have either one of those, Permafrost or double stack. I mean, even if you don't have a Shadow Siege build, being able to have a Permafrosted Perils of Production means that you can wait until you have an X-Cost card, and then you get 3 extra ticks of that X-Cost card, which can be really, really powerful. Okay, moving on. Prismal Dust. Prismal Dust has text, consume, apply 1x damage shield. So damage shield's a little bit interesting. We talked about it a little bit with the Crucible Warden, but we can talk about it more in detail here. Damage shield is really good against high damage units. It's really bad against lots of low damage ticks. It's especially bad against multi-strikers compared to lifesteal. It's much worse than lifesteal for multi-strikers or for low damage dealers. And for relentless combats, especially against Seraph, you really need a lot of damage shield, like 20 plus damage shield, to really get a lot of advantage out of it. So Prismal Dust then ends up being kind of weird, where playing it for 3 is okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean 3 turns of block. That means 3 ticks of block. And a lot of times you're having floors with multiple damaging units, so then you kind of lose a lot of value out of it compared to what you would get out of a lifesteal. Where Prismal Dust becomes a lot better is once you've double stacked it, and especially if you get the first Hell Pact, then you can play it for 0 and get 4 damage shield out of it. That's pretty good. If you get the first Hell Pact, I would recommend removing Consume from it, because then you can stack it pretty consistently. The other place that damage shield is really good is with Superfood Primordium, because Superfood Primordium is typically in the back. Then you can play damage shield, and all that damage shield gets added to the front unit, but you don't lose the damage shield, so you can add it multiple times. But in general, I find it to be potentially pretty weak. But I guess it's more on the average side. And then you can make it really powerful, but it's difficult to make really powerful without specific artifacts or without specific build setup. Given that, I think it's an average card that can be powerful, but it's very difficult to make powerful. So it fits really nicely as a B- then. Average card, can be strong, difficult to make strong. Yeah, that fits really well for this. Next up is Space Prism. Space Prism has text, consume +1 capacity on this floor. It's a 0 cost. It's great. Space Prism is really straightforward. You just get a capacity. With Umbra, capacity is extremely valuable because you're generating morsels. Even outside of Umbra, capacity is always going to be good. It's very rare that, unless you have like a crazy overstacking build, it's very rare that you don't want extra capacity. So given that it's an almost always strong effect, it's 0 cost to play, and then it consumes and gets out of your deck permanently after that, I think it's a solid A. It's a strong card that becomes really powerful in decks where you can take advantage of the extra capacity. So yeah, pretty straightforward. It's nice because it's common, so you can have it start in your deck, and you just have 2 extra capacity. It's fine. And Umbra Assault. Umbra Assault has text, deal 3 damage. On Slay, gain 2 uncommon or rare morsel units to your hand. It's a 1 cost. It's pretty good. It's better at the beginning when units already have quite low health. It's also pretty good late if you have consistent common morsel generation, because then you can kill off your own common morsels to get more morsels. Where it becomes bad is late game, killing enemies becomes much more difficult with it, and 3 damage for 1 is pretty bad. It's barely better than a torch. So this is one where I kind of tossed around where this should fit, because it can get pretty weak, but I think it's very easy to make it average or strong. And in certain builds, it can be really powerful. If you get +10 on it, for example, you get 10 extra damage, then you're getting pretty consistent kills with it. Any backliner will die from it. And then you are getting 2 morsels out of it. So given that setup, I think it's an average card that can become really strong. It's not typically going to be super powerful, unless you have like a really crazy deck that morsels just become really strong with. Given that, I think it really fits into this kind of B-, an average card that can become strong with the right setup, but difficult to make it very, very strong. Making a Morsel. Making a Morsel has text, add a Morsel Miner to your hand. It's a 2 cost. A Morsel Miner is a 1 damage, 1 health morsel that adds +5 health, +5 damage to the unit that eats it. Making a Morsel by itself, I actually find to be kind of weak. For 2 cost, getting 1 morsel is not particularly great. Oftentimes, your Gorgers don't care necessarily which morsels they get, they just care that they get a morsel. And so you're paying twice as much as a Shade Splitter for the same Gorge effect. Where it becomes much stronger is if you have units that have multi-strike or really take advantage of the extra health and damage. It's also really good once you get it down to 1 cost or 0 cost. So I think it fits as a weak card base. So 2 Ember for a Morsel Miner is not worth it in almost every case. But it's so easy to make it 1 cost, and then it's very strong. Given that, I think it fits really nicely as a C+ card. So it's a weak card that can become very powerful, and it's pretty easy to make it very powerful. Certainly it becomes a lot better once you have things like Morsel Master or Shroud Mitosis or multi-strike on your gorging unit. Then you're getting a lot of advantage from it. Uncommon. In the uncommon cards, we have Prism Retrieval. It's an X-cost card with text consume. Draw a unit and apply 5 times damage and -5 or minus Ember, minus X Ember. Gosh, that was hard to say. Prism Retrieval. Prism Retrieval's a dead weight in almost every build. It's very hard to take advantage of it. However, there are specific builds that end up being really good with Prism Retrieval. There are builds where you remove the consume from it, and you have a way to like get it killed with endless, and then draw it again, and then kill it, and then draw it again, and then kill it, and then draw it again. That can work. It is a way to enable certain endless combos, but I find it to be just really, really clunky. This is almost a D card for me, but I do leave it because if you get the first Hell Pact, it's pretty good. And if you have a way to kill an minion and then bring it back and then keep upgrading it, it can become really strong. But outside of those cases, it's pretty weak. And so I think it fits really nicely as a C- card. It's a weak card that can become very powerful, but it's very difficult to make it powerful. Then we have Ember Cache. Ember Cache has text consume. Add 3 excavated Ember cards to your discard pile. Excavated Ember cards are 0 cost spells that draw 1 and add 2 Ember. Ember Cache is another great way to deal with emberdrain. So if you have an emberdrain oriented deck, we have the emberdrain package, then you can use Ember Cache in order to get Ember in the future starting from 0. Because then you can play the excavated embers and get advantage from them. If you have a setup like that, typically removing consume and minusing 1 is the route to go, because then you have infinite excavated embers that you can use. It's a really good card against Seraph the Diligent because you can just get rid of it, and then you also have 3 more cards that can consume later. So it's basically 4 rounds potentially of not having to consume another spell. And yeah, I think the effect is really, really strong. It's fantastic in incant builds, and it's fantastic with the Emberdrain package. Given that, I don't think there's ever a time when it's weak. At worst, it's like slightly above average. I think it's a very strong card. I think it's a solid A card that I would take in almost every case. The only time when you would not take it is when draw is really, really important. Even over everything else, and you can't take advantage of the Ember. So next one up is Feast. Feast has text, trigger feeding on units with eaten abilities. It's a 0 cost card. So this means that it will trigger on Primordium and trigger on our morsels, and they'll get immediately eaten. This will only work as long as there is a Gorger or another unit on the floor. If there's nothing on the floor, Feast won't do anything. Feast is a little bit weird. It has moments where it can be incredibly powerful, but there are basically 2 cases for it. So one is, if you need the immediate benefit of the morsels, then Feast allows you to get that benefit right away without having to wait until the end of the turn. That can be really useful for getting that little bit of damage you need to kill off a front unit, or getting that damage shield or lifesteal you need to keep your front unit surviving. The other major case for it is when you have so many morsels that you can't play them all out. Then you can play all your morsels, feast, and then play more morsels on top. Outside of those 2 cases, it's very, very weak. It's basically a deadweight. It doesn't do anything other than maybe as an incant. Given that kind of feast or famine that you get with the card, I think it fits really well as a C- card. But those 2 cases are really hard to set up. Specifically the cases where you need right then the benefit of the morsels, and those cases where you have so many morsels that you can afford to feast. It works really well with Retch. So if you get Feast and Retch together, then they become really powerful. But outside of that combo, it's hard to justify, in my opinion, keeping this in your hand. Or keeping this in your deck. Next up is Cannibalize. Cannibalize has text, Sacrifice. Sacrifice means kill off one of your own units. And then you add 3 uncommon or rare morsel units to your hand. This is, I think, a worse... what's it called? I already forgot the names of things. 0 cost, gain 3 Ember, or gain 3 morsels. 0 cost, gain 3 morsels. Because you do have to sacrifice something. Where it becomes quite good is when you're sacrificing things that you want to die anyway. So it can be good as a way to get rid of imps, for example, if you're doing an imp build. It's a way to kill Bounty Stalker if you want Bounty Stalker to die and then come back and die and come back. Similar with Little Fade, if you want Little Fade to die and come back, or any other unit to die and come back. This can be quite good. So Melting Remnant tends to go well with Cannibalize. Otherwise, you use it to kill off 1 morsel to get more morsels, which is also pretty good. So you trade 1 morsel for 3 morsels for 1 cost, can be really good. If you get like Shade Splitter consistently, or if you have an Ember or a morsel generating relic, you can do this pretty consistently. Cannibalize is one of those cards that seems to be always generating more morsels than I can play for some reason. Compared to other cards, for some reason, it just always seems that way. There's a few others that are like that, but I think it's okay as long as you can consistently guarantee there's going to be a unit you want to kill every turn. It's okay. Given that it's just an okay effect, I would say it's like an average effect that can become really strong in the right builds. I think it fits really nicely as a B-. So you're most likely going to be able to cannibalize something. And if you cannibalize something and get something out of it, that's a pretty average effect. But it can become really strong in certain builds where you want to actually sacrifice a unit because you want to have it die. Then it can become much better. Next up is in reverse order, engine upgrade. It's a B. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's a B card. The reason why I think it's a B card is you get -1 capacity for +1 permanent ember for 1. Is an average it's a strong effect. It's never going to be super powerful. I don't think any deck is going to just all of a sudden become nuts because you get 1 more ember per turn. But it is a strong effect. It will help with a lot of builds. The one build that it's complete trash in is in the emberdrain build because you just don't need that extra ember. But it's very rare you're playing 3 floors. So then you can just -1 on 1 floor and be happy. You have your floor you're not playing units on anyway, has 1 less capacity, and you get 1 permanent ember for the rest of the battle. Minus cost on it makes it even easier to play. The fact that it consumes is really good because then it's out of your deck permanently. You get the 1 ember and then it's gone. So as I say, I think it's a strong effect. It's never going to be super powerful, but it's okay. Next is Void Binding. Void Binding has text apply damage shield 2, rage 6, and ember drain 3. It's a 1 cost. The double nerfs really hurt this. So there were 2 different nerfs. One was that it increased in cost from 0 to 1. And then it got nerfed again when double stack got nerfed from being a stack stone being a just double the effects of all the buffs. Now it doubles the effects and it makes the card cost 1 more, which means you can't ever get a 0 cost double stacked Void Binding unless you have 3 upgrades on it. And that becomes really problematic because the best part about Void Binding was that you could play it for free. So now you can still play it for free, but you have to minus the cost on it, and the effect is not as good because you can't double stack it. So it's gone are the days of holdover double stacked Void Bindings that are just insane. But that was too strong. That was an S card back in the day. Now I would say it's more of like a weak base card because 2 damage shield is not really that great, and 2 rage and 6 rage is not that great for 1 cost now and 3 ember drain later. It's literally only good base if you already have the ember drain package or if you play it right before relentless combat or right before the unit's going to die anyway. So given that, I think it's a base C card that can become very powerful, and the way I would normally do it is -1. The alternative is double stack -1 as long as you can consistently generate ember. But I think just -1 is the better play. Then it's a 0 cost card. You can play it consistently and you're not stressing about the ember drain because you can still play your Void Bindings. Next up is Cave In. Cave In has text, descend friendly and enemy units on this floor. So it will descend all units down 1 floor, both sides, as long as you have not capacity, but unit space left. So you can have a maximum of 7 units on every floor. That's on both sides. So then as long as there's less than 7 total units, if you combine both floors, they will all drop. The descended units will always go into the back. They will stay in the order that they were on that floor. And I think it's prioritized. Does it prioritize back to front or front to back? I think it's back to front. If you have 7, more than 7 total, I think it's the back ones descend first and then the front one stays. But someone may have to check that for me. I can't remember for certain if that's the case. But anyway, Cave In can be really good. It's very expensive, so it's 2 costs, which is kind of expensive. And it's not always that you need to descend units, but it's a really great way to overstack. It's also a great way to have a full capacity floor and then be able to descend morsels to gorge. So you put your morsels above it, you descend the morsels, they get gorged, but you can still have a full capacity floor anyway. So for those two purposes, being able to overstack a floor and being able to move like morsels on an overstacked floor is pretty good. Outside of that, it's not as great in my opinion. You typically don't use it to move units down. Maybe use it to move Seraph down if you want to get an early flying kill on Seraph. But that's not typically how I use it. So I think it's actually base is pretty weak. Descending is only good if you are either overstacking or maybe if you have days when you descend could also be good. But those are basically the only cases. Given that, I think it's a weak card that can become quite strong. And the way to make it quite strong is to just minus the cost of it. So if you make it a 0 or 1 cost, then it's significantly better. You can play a bunch of morsels, descend them down, play a bunch of units, overstack them, and then it's pretty strong. I guess you could use it also to descend units so that you can get a second chance at hitting them. But that's, I would say, a very fringe case. Next up, Crucible Extension. Crucible Extension has text +1 capacity on this floor, and it costs 2. Crucible Extension is significantly worse than Space Prism in several ways. One, you don't typically want to have it in your deck all the time. You'd rather have it consume, because you don't need that much capacity. A few capacity is good. Having way too much capacity is not as good, unless you specifically have a build where you're constantly playing units onto a floor that has a lot of capacity. And those are not so common. That would be like if you just need to play a lot of morsels over and over again every time. It can happen, but it's a pretty rare setup. The other problem with it is that it's 2 cost. If you remove Consume from Space Prism, it's already better because you've already removed the Consume and it's a 1 cost. So the fact that it's 2 cost also makes it pretty bad. You really need to make it a 1 cost to make the effect worth it, in my opinion. And even then, I still don't love that it's always in your deck. But I would say having extra capacity is worth it. It's worth taking if you don't have any other way to increase capacity and you need the extra capacity. But it tends to be not so good as just a Space Prism, which you can just play and get rid of. Given that setup, I think it's a B-. This might even be a C-, but no, it's probably a B-. I would say 2 costs for 1 capacity, still an average effect. It's not a strong effect. And then you can make it good by significantly reducing the cost or by building a deck around having a lot of capacity. Then it gets a lot better. But yeah, base average is probably right. It's not weak, it's not a dead weight, but it certainly could be worse. Or certainly could be better once you get it a lower cost. And then when you, and to say, when you have that build where you want lots of capacity, the best is -1 cost and then holdover. And you can just get massive amounts of capacity, and then you have all the capacity you need to play all your units out. Next up is Grovel. Grovel has text, apply damage shield 1, add 2 uncommon or rare morsel units to your hand. I think this is an average effect. 1 damage shield isn't really that great, but the +2 morsels for 2 is pretty good. And it's pretty easy to get this effect because you're almost always going to have units out to play compared to a lot of the others, which you can't always guarantee, like Umbra Assault or some of the others like that. Or like Mitosis or something like that. Where the Grovel becomes amazing is when you have it at 1 cost. It's really, really good. And 1 cost holdover is even better because then you can play it and stack the damage shield over time. Don't stack stone this, it's really bad. A 3 cost for this effect with 2 damage shield is really terrible. But -1 cost, holdover, permafrost, these can all be good ways to take advantage of the Grovel. Given that, I think it's a solid B+ card. It's a worse than average card, but can be strong very easily with just a single -1 cost. Next up, Excavation Eruption. Excavation Eruption has text, deal 20 damage to a random enemy unit 4 times. This is not the same unit 4 times. This is 4 times deal damage to a random enemy unit. It's an important distinction. And then on Slay, gain 2 Ember. So the biggest problem with Excavation Eruption is if you can't play it. If you get this as a starter card, which you can because it's uncommon, there's a chance you just can't play it until after the Daedalus fight. And then it's really bad. It's just a dead weight that's been in your hand for a lot of the time. Once you can play it, it becomes pretty good. It's pretty rare that you don't get at least 2 Ember out of it. So if you minus the cost of it down to 3, Then it's like a 1 cost, deal 80 damage that's split between 4 distinct attacks, which is really, really strong. The typical way that I do it is I do -1 and then +10 damage, because I find that the +10 damage actually ends up adding a lot of value to it. It's another 40 damage on the card. And 3 cost is enough that you can play it without having to get any Ember upgrades. But once you can play it, it's really strong. So I think it's a C+ card. It's a card that can be a deadweight when you can't play it, and then is really good when you can play it. It's really bad also with emberdrain package, because it's not often that with the emberdrain package you have enough Ember to play it outright. But you can still kind of make it work if you can get like a Perils of Production, and then you minus the cost of this down to 3. Then you can Perils of Production, Excavation Eruption, and then do whatever else you need to play that turn. But outside of that, it's a really difficult card to play with emberdrain. Next up is Gem Trove. Gem Trove is text, apply damage shield 1 to friendly units, add 3 uncommon or rare morsels to your hand for 4 cost. At this, I think it's really bad to start with. It's even pretty bad at 3 cost. Yeah, there's a lot easier ways to get 3 morsels than playing Gem Trove. And the damage shield on all friendly units, it can be beneficial, but it also can be really weak. I think this needs to be 3 cost, to be honest, to be good. Right now I find it very weak, and I find it very difficult to take advantage of this card even when you can play it. So I think it's more of a C- card. It can become very powerful if you have lots of Ember and you have lots of space, and you can take advantage of the damage shield on all the units. So if you have like an overstacked floor with Cave In, you can use damage shield to get everything with damage shield. You play your morsels on the floor above, and then you cave in them down. But it's like such a rare setup that I just find Gem Trove to be very awkward and clunky, just not very good. It's almost a D, but there are ways to make it powerful enough that I keep it as a C- for now. Now rare cards, starting with Kindle. Kindle has text 2x Ember, which means that if you play it, for every Ember that you use, you get an extra Ember back. I think Kindle as a base is an average effect. Without even upgrading it or without having a build around it, you can usually take advantage of the extra Ember. So I think it's average as a worst case, but it does have the potential to be really strong. If you're using it, for example, to get Shadow Siege out, if you're using it to get a really strong other X cost card, if you're using it to be able to enable, you could play like Excavation Eruption or another high cost card or several high cost cards, then it can be pretty good. It's also pretty good as a card to draft as a separate clan than Umbra. So if you get this in one of the rare events where you can get a consume card, it's also pretty good. But I find it very, very difficult to make it very powerful. I can usually keep it at an average or a strong effect, but to make it really powerful, you have to have like a very specific kind of build where you take advantage of a lot of Ember. So if you have like an Ember Drain build where you have like multiple Perils of Production or excavated Embers, and then you play Kindle on top, and then you play an X cost, then it can be really strong. But that's a very specific setup, and I find it very difficult to get all the time. So given that, I think it's a grade of B-. It's an average card that can become very powerful, but I find it difficult to make it very powerful. Next up is Shroud Spike. Shroud Spike has text consume, trigger feeding on a morsel unit 2x times. I think Shroud Spike is the best of the spikes. It's almost always a really good effect. You get to gorge the morsel immediately, which means any benefit you get from gorging, you get immediately as well. So if you have George the Penumbra and you play this, you get all of his gorge effects. If you get Crucible Warden, Crucible Collector, Shadow Eater, you get their effects immediately. Overgorger as well. And the other major benefit is that you're taking one morsel and you're multiplying it several times. Even at 1 cost, to be able to take a morsel for 1 cost and make it 2 morsels is good. It's an average effect. But if you get it with 2 or 3, now you're taking 1 morsel and turning it into 4 morsels or 6 morsels, which is incredible. So this is base average. And this might even be an A. I guess the only time it's not good is if you don't have morsels. But if you don't have morsels, you won't take it because it's a rare draft, so you can't start with it. This might arguably be an A, but I think I gave it a B+. It's right on the line right there, where it's you can get an average effect from it, but it's almost always going to be a really good effect. So this is arguably an A, but we'll keep it at a B minus, or sorry, at a B plus for now. Wretch. Wretch has text, return eaten units to your hand. It's a 0 cost. It does not consume. It's interesting. Wretch can be really powerful with Primordium decks because it's the only way to get Primordium back after it dies. You can't reform it. And it's really good with decks that have a way to use lots and lots of morsels. So if you have like Feast, for example, it's a really good combination to get Feast and Wretch together. It's super powerful. But if you don't have any of that and you're not gorging a lot, it's a dead weight. Given that variance, I think it fits really well as a C plus card. It's pretty easy to take advantage of it. You get holdover on it, then you have infinite morsels as long as you've had a few morsels gorged already. You get it with Feast, it's incredible. But without those combinations and without consistent gorging already, it tends to be a very weak card. So I think it fits in that kind of C plus area. Shroud Mitosis. Shroud Mitosis is text, create 3 copies of a morsel unit for 1 cost. Shroud Mitosis is really good. As long as you have a morsel every turn, you turn that morsel into 4 morsels for 1 cost. That's really good. That's not even considering things like Morsel Master, which will duplicate the morsels created by Shroud Mitosis. It's not considering that you can create a copy of a morsel that has damage shield or has other benefits on top of it. It's also not considering that you can pick which morsel you're copying. So if you get something like Morsel Miner plus Shroud Mitosis on holdover, both of them, that's insanely powerful. I think it's very rare you don't have at least 1 morsel when you have Shroud Mitosis. So at minimum, it's a strong effect, but I think it can be incredibly powerful. Maybe it's better to say it's an average effect that can be very, very powerful. Given that setup, I think it fits really nicely as a B+. It's an average card at worst case, but it's very, very easy to make it very, very powerful. Yeah, I think that fits really well. The nice thing is that these also overstack. So you can play it on a floor that's already at maximum capacity, and then you can triple a morsel to get even more morsels on that floor and overstack the floor. Furnace Tap. Furnace Tap has text, consume, apply Rage 3, Multi-Strike 1, and Emberdrain 4. Furnace Tap is the best card in the game. Multi-Strike is one of, if not the best single upgrade you can put onto a unit. Certainly if you already have a lot of Multi-Strike, it gets less valuable the more you have it. But the fact that you get Rage and Multi-Strike for 2 cost is insane. You don't have to play it the first turn you draw it. You can wait to play it if you're worried about the Emberdrain. And certainly you need to be concerned about the Emberdrain. But this is why the Emberdrain package works. Without Furnace Tap, the Emberdrain package is just not very good. But there's very rarely ever going to be a time when adding Multi-Strike to a unit is just not super crazy powerful. Plus, you can double stack it, and you can permafrost it. So you can double stack permafrost, and then you just wait till the relentless combat or until the turn when you're going to die if you don't play it right away, and then you play it and win. So it's not an auto win, but it's really hard to lose when you have Furnace Tap. It's a great card to duplicate. If you have Ember Generation via Perils of Production or Ember Cache or something like that, then you can even remove Consume from it, and you can get multiple Furnace Taps out. It is as I said, it's the best card of the game. It's an S. You always take it when it shows up. It does not matter what your deck is. You take Furnace Tap, and you will benefit. Umbra Stone. Umbra Stone has text, consume, apply Trample. It's a 2-cost stone. Trample's really great. Trample takes a high damage and allows it to then be AoE. It's fantastic with sweep units. So if you don't know, with sweep, the way that sweep works with Trample is any access damage on any one of the units gets carried over to the next unit. The backliner then goes to the front line. And what that means is if you have a sweep unit and you put Trample on it, you take the damage of that sweep unit, you multiply it by the number of units that are out there, that is the damage you will do. That is always the damage that you will do. If you have strike effects on your sweep units, those strike effects will also get applied multiple times every time it gets carried over. It's really, really strong. I don't think there's ever a time when Umbra, or not when Umbra, when you don't want trample. You can always just put it on a unit and then incidentally kill units due to the trample effect. It's fantastic on units with slate triggers. It's fantastic on units with sweep. It's fantastic on units that have high damage. It's always good. It's not amazingly powerful, but I would say it's always at least a strong effect. It's a grade A. I think you take it most of the time unless you literally have a better card to draw. And it's really great to get through Concealed Cavern events. And it's one of the reasons why you take the Consume Concealed Cavern event, because you might get Umbra Stone. Blazing Bolts, last card in the set. Blazing Bolts has text Purge. That means it's permanently removed from your deck when you play it. Deal 30 damage to the front enemy unit. Add a stronger version of this card to your discard. The stronger versions add more ticks of damage. So first, the second upgrade gives you 2 ticks of damage. The third upgrade gives you 4 ticks of damage. It's really, really strong. Baseline, it's average. If you play it one time, 30 for 30s, kind of average. It gets much better when you reduce the cost of it, or when you add damage stone or magic power to it, or once you've played it twice. It's a fantastic card. I think it's one of the best damage dealing cards in the game. And it's certainly one that you're happy to get as a card from Umbra when you're not playing Umbra. But even in Umbra, it's really good. Given how good it is, I think it fits really nicely as a B+. So it's an average card at worst, but it can become very powerful with the right upgrades and once you've played it a couple of times. Actually, I lied. There's one more card. Last is Forever Consumed. So Forever Consumed is an X-cost card. It's deal 30x damage to the front unit. Baseline, it's pretty bad. I mean, one cost for 30 is actually okay. I should say it's okay. But with Umbra, you're not usually looking to do a lot of burst damage with spells. Where Forever Consumed becomes nuts is when you have insane Ember generation. So you're going to have more Ember than you're ever going to use. Then you can put all your excess Ember into a massive Forever Consumed. It's also amazing with the first Hell Pact. But without those two, I would say it's a very weak effect. It would be better if it was 30x or 30 damage to the front enemy unit X times. That would be much, much better. But 30x by itself is not as good. Given that, I think it fits as a grade C+. It is a weak card that is pretty easy to make very, very strong. And that is everything. So let's do the broad overview now. So summary of cards. We have an S rank Furnace Tap, the best card in the game. In A rank, we have Overgorger, Packed Morsels, Space Prism, Ember Cache, and Umbra Stone. Under B, we have Crucible Collector as a B+, Crucible Warden as a B+, Morsel Master as a B, Shadow Eater as a B-, Mind Collapse as a B+, Immortal Trade as a B-, Perils of Production as a B+, Prismal Dust as B+, Tumber Assault as a minus, Cannibalize as a minus, Engine Upgrade as a standard B, Crucible Extension as a minus, Grovel as a plus, Kindle as a minus, Shroud Spike as a plus, Shroud Mitosis as a plus, and Blazing Bolts as a plus. Then under C, we have Ember Forge minus, Alloyed Construct plus, Morsel Maker plus, Shadow Siege plus, Shade Splitter spelled wrong, Plink as a minus, Making a Morsel as a plus, Prism Retrieval minus, Void Binding plus, Cave In plus, Excavation Eruption plus, Gem Trove minus, Wretch plus, and Forever Consumed plus. There are no D cards, I believe, in the deck. So, what's the summary for Umbra? Umbra has certainly some of the most powerful cards in the game. It has the most powerful card in the game. I think it's got the best consume cards in the game, which is very interesting. The Emberdrain package is amazing. The units are all pretty strong. Overgorger can get nuts. Both of the Warden and Collector, the Crucibles, are pretty good. And yeah, the Morsel Generation is always really good. I think it's a very solid, strong deck. I don't think it has the highest highs out of all of the decks in the game, but I think it's a very, very consistent deck compared to all of the other clans. And with that, we are done with the Umbra review of all cards.